Hey, Nicole.
What's up, Rollie?
An EV episode season 1, an EV episode season 2. I'm just glad that the next time we have to talk about EVs is season 3.
Oh, Rollie, I have some bad news.
What's up?
I have at least an hour more EV stuff we got to talk about now.
Oh, well, I hope we can edit it down to a crisp 45.
Okay, Rollie. So on the last episode, we talked about sort of the big structural kind of issues with EVs, both in terms of the environment and in terms of human rights.
EV being the Pokemon that can evolve into several different...
Exactly.
Okay.
And one of the things she evolves into is an electric vehicle,
Okay.
which fortunately also shortens to EV. If you want to learn more about those issues, I would also encourage you to go listen to the last episode because that's where we talked about all of that. Today, I want to talk about kind of the other section of complaints that I hear about electric vehicles, which is just, it's not practical for my lifestyle. I could never have an EV. But today, I want to talk about sort of a different argument against EVs. And if you listen to the last episode, you know that we started with a clip with Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg talking to Representative Pete Stober of Minnesota. And Pete Stober had a lot of very sincere and well-meaning and coherent thoughts about the environmental and human rights impacts of EVs. But he also had some objections that sounded more like this.
Mr. Secretary, do you know the average income household in the district that I represent? You probably don't, so I'll tell you. It's $69,000. Do you know what the average price of an EV vehicle is?
Sure, I pulled the latest numbers. The models are starting around $30,000 for sedans. They're getting into the 40s for...
According to Kelley Blue Book, the average price for electric cars was over $53,000.
Surely you're aware that they start closer to 30, right?
My constituents would have to work a full year to pay for this unreliable car and would barely have enough left over to care for their family. Do you know the average temperature in a Minnesota winter?
I know it's pretty cold, but I wouldn't know
Well,
that.
it's 12 degrees, although some of my constituents saw temperatures as cold as 42 below last year. How much can an EV battery life be reduced by cold weather?
Depends on the chemistry of the battery and the model that you're in, but it's a substantial percentage of the EV battery life.
50% or more. By 2035, you want 2/3 of Americans to be using electric vehicles. They don't work in northern Minnesota in the cold weather today.
So that's kind of the other main argument that you hear against EVs, which is like either people who like actively don't like EVs or people who might like an EV, but are like, well, it's just not practical for my daily life. It would never work for me.
What if it was raining?
Well, if you're in a Cybertruck, that could be an actual problem.
Yeah, that's true.
But for a regular good EV, the rain would be fine. And you know who else thinks that EVs won't work for hard-working, everyday Americans? This guy.
Here's the problem with an electric car. They don't go far. Very simple. Somebody would say, I wish I could make it more complex. Like, here's the problem. They don't go far. They cost a fortune. But they don't go far. So unless you want to go to the local store or something, you're not going to buy it. If you say, let's take a trip to, let's see, what's a nice place around? Let's go to Ohio. Let's say, let's go down to Florida. No, you'd have to make 30 stops, right?
You know that Simpsons episode, right? It's like a famous thing from The Simpsons where it's like, let's go to the electric car ride. And it's like, I'm an electric car. I can't go very fast or very far.
And if you drive me, people will think you're gay.
And then it's three animatronic dudes in like short shorts going, one of us. One of us. Have you never seen this?
No.
That's like weirdly almost word for word what Trump is saying in this quote.
So funny.
And it was like, and the end of it was like paid for by the General Motors or something, like internal combustion engine cars of America.
Well, as Rollie has alluded to, that was America's real president, Donald Trump. And that
Best president, not even close.
and that was at a rally from last year. So let's talk about it. I would say that range anxiety and not being able to go very far is probably the primary concern for most people buying an EV. I know that when I was looking at buying cars, I started looking kind of before the Tesla Model 3 came out and before there were any like really affordable electric cars. And one of my big concerns was at the time I was living in Los Angeles, I wanted to be able to drive back to Colorado. The cars at the time got like 150 miles of range. That is no longer true. According to Bloomberg, the average electric car sold in the U.S. is fast approaching 300 miles between charges, according to an analysis of more than a decade of EV sales. Last year's average range climbed to 291 miles, putting the U.S. average above all other major car markets and a third higher than the global average.
Wow.
That being said, this is a little true that they don't go quite as far. Weirdly, there's not a ton of concise data about the average car in America.
Like an internal combustion engine
yeah,
car?
Yeah. And I think part of that is because like the answer is going to be very different depending on the size of your gas tank, the size of your car, that kind of stuff. So most of the numbers that I found were between 350 and 500 total miles on one tank. My car, if it's on gas only because it's a plug-in hybrid, gets about 330 miles per gallon. So I wouldn't notice a huge difference.
330 miles per gallon? Nicole, you got to sell this car.
Per tank.
This is an amazing find.
My car, if it's on gas only gets about 330 miles for a full tank of gas. So I wouldn't notice a huge difference between your average electric car and my car in terms of number of stops I had to make on a road trip. The Lucid Air gets 410 miles. Bloomberg says 516, but I couldn't find that number anywhere else. And the Mercedes EQS gets 400 miles according to Car and Driver. So there are some electric cars, mostly expensive luxury cars, that do get comparable ranges to a full tank of gas. That technology is improving, per that Bloomberg article. I think an important question to ask is how far are most of your trips really? And this is when I want to once again quote my dear friend Jason Torchinsky.
The Torch,
who I told you all about in episode 1. He is an incredible automotive writer. He does, I think, some of the most interesting automotive writing out there right now. He founded a website called The Autopian, which we'll link in the comments. And when I asked him about EVs, he told me this. I would encourage people to be more flexible when it comes to the idea of range. Really be honest with yourself. The big batteries, the heaviness, those are the biggest detriment to what EVs could be and how they could be adapted. Many American households already have 2 cars, and I'm going to propose to you the crazy idea. What if you had one electric car that you use for most of your local trips, and you keep a gas car around for the one time a year you're driving to Ohio or Fort Lauderdale or wherever.
Lauderdale, too many stops.
Too many stops, can't go to Florida.
Beautiful gators.
Yes. You gotta see those gators.
Sharp teeth, best teeth in America, not even close.
Every time my parents go to Florida, I get a photo from my mom of my dad standing way too close to an alligator.
I can't tell if alligators are dangerous or not.
Yes.
But that's what it feels like. But like, are they dangerous?
One ate a child at a resort like 3 years ago.
Yeah, and like, I don't know, if you've got to take a road trip, couldn't you rent a car if you needed to?
1 or 2 road trips a year.
My mom is worried about range anxiety. I don't think she drives more than 20 miles ever. Like, I don't know. I can't imagine a reason why she would. Maybe she's got to go to Boulder, 35 miles away. Yeah. She'd go to Boulder and back 4 times and be fine on an average range.
And her preferred grocery store is in Boulder. So
that's true. Yeah.
Sometimes she's got to go all the way up there.
She likes the Alfalfa's Market in Boulder.
According to the Department of Energy, over half of all trips in the United States were less than 3 miles. So if you have range anxiety for 3 miles, I understand why an electric car might not feel like the right choice. If you've got an electric car that can only go 3 miles, that's a problem.
Yeah, if you have range anxiety for 3 miles, you just have anxiety.
Yeah. You should. An electric car isn't the problem. I think you need to go see a therapist or something.
Yeah.
Just 2% of all trips were greater than 50 miles. You know, I have a whole outline for this section, but I think this is going to become more of a free-form discussion because I want to use this quote from Jason because it really helped me think about this. Jason told me, if we start thinking of EVs as not the one tool for everything we have to do in a car, but the tool that does what you need when you need it, we can go down a more sustainable path. And I think thinking of cars as tools, which is what they are, is really helpful. There's no reason that you have to take your big road trip car everywhere you go. You and I both have plug-in electric hybrids.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Mine gets a little more electric mileage than yours does, but yours has better gas mileage than mine. But I think one nice thing about both of them is that for daily trips, I'm almost never using gas.
I'm almost never in the car. I'm not even confident where my car is right now.
But I think that for households that need to have one car, I think a plug-in electric hybrid, which I think they're finally starting to make more of. For a while, they were phasing those out. And now I think that's a much more practical car for a lot of people who maybe take a few road trips a year, but most of their drive is their 10-mile commute to work or whatever. The corollary to that and range anxiety is people think they're really hard to charge. I'm going to be down to like 2 miles left on my battery. I'm not going to be able to get to a charger. Anecdotally, this is at least a little true. I have found it, particularly my dad has a Tesla Model 3. Charging his car is very easy because Tesla has by far the best charging network. My car that uses a level 2 charger because it's like an old model, very hard to find chargers. Was easier, weirdly, in Colorado even than where I lived in California. Certain states are easier than others. You've experienced this here too, where sometimes you'll find a place that there's a charger, but we're not allowed to access it for whatever reason. We definitely need a lot more chargers.
Yeah. That feels like a problem of the infrastructure and not inherent to the EV.
If you have to buy a new car tomorrow, then it's like, well, the charging network isn't going to get better tomorrow. So I understand that concern.
Yeah.
I would say it's pretty doable with a Tesla, maybe less so with other cars if you can't charge at home. If you can charge at home, I think it's very doable.
Yeah, I used to, when I spent some time in California, I hung an extension cord out the second floor window and into the car, and it's like, all right.
Our parking space was directly under we were on the second floor, but our parking space was directly under us. So we just hung an extension cord out, and you know what? It worked. So per the Alternative Fuels Data Center, we have 62,460 charging stations, and at those charging stations, there are 166,328 ports as of March 26, 2024.
Now, is it relevant here to ask how many gas stations there are in America?
Kind of. I can tell you that per fueleconomy.gov.
Whoa.
Yeah.
What a site.
The big guys. There's 168,000 gas stations.
Okay.
But that's stations, not pumps. I couldn't find a great source on how many total pumps there are, especially because every time you go to a gas station, like 2 of them aren't working. But at NLXway blog, the website we all know and trust.
Yes, NLXway.
They say, when last measured in 2020, the 150,000 gas stations operating in the U.S. serviced 276 million cars. While statistics don't exist for the number of total pumps in the U.S., if we assume the average station has between 6 and 12 pumps, which seems reasonable to me.
Sure.
That's around 900,000 to 1.8 million pumps.
Okay. If we assume the average station has 100 billion pumps, that's trillions of pumps.
Exactly.
But that's not strictly connected?
Yeah, I don't know how helpful that is, only because the way that you refuel an EV and own an EV is just different than the way that you refill a gas car. Like, for example, you can charge your EV at home, but you can't fill your car up with gas at home unless you live in a very unique situation. And it also takes longer to charge a car than it does to fill up with gas. Most of the time, if you're just kind of topping off your Tesla at a supercharger, it might take about the same amount of time. So it's again, like so many things with electric cars, it's hard to make a one-to-one comparison.
Okay.
But we are going to need a lot more charging ports, particularly publicly available charging ports, like off the highway, because that is what alleviates a lot of people's range anxiety. Fortunately, the Biden administration is making some progress on this. They have a goal of building 500,000 chargers in the United States by 2030. So that's about half of what we're going to need to get to what they call the mid-adoption point, which is... It's very mid. There's about 33 million electric cars on the road. And these are public chargers, by the way. We're also going to need big expansion of like home charging networks in single family and multi-family residences, as well as like...
You can't make a stranger come into my garage and charge on my charger, Nicole.
So we need a lot of home chargers too, but just in terms of public charging, which is like going to go a long way to relieve people's range anxiety, 500,000 chargers by 2030. And there's $5 billion set aside as part of the EV charging action plan to do that. As of right now, they haven't built a ton of them. And part of that is because there are like fairly stringent requirements that have to be accommodated to receive that money. It has to be built at least every 50 miles over major routes. It has to be operational at least 97% of the time, and they have to feature credit card readers for easy payment. As somebody who is not an electrical engineer, none of that really seems that hard to me, except for the like every 50 miles. I could understand why that would be a challenge, but like the credit card reader thing seems pretty basic.
There's some weird like legislation about what you can do on highway rest stops. That's like
Interesting.
gonna come.
Okay, maybe that's it. So the government is moving kind of slow because that is how federal funding works. But they are making progress on this, and I think they'll continue to.
And thank the Lord Jesus Christ for modern Jesus Christ, Elon Musk, and his national network of Tesla chargers. I mean, he received so much money from the government. He's building out this giant Tesla charger.
Boy, Rollie.
Well, hang on, I'm not done. Big infrastructure all across America that Elon is going to build. He's promised that he's going to build it. I just can't. I mean, that's going to help a lot.
So
right?
I don't know if you've heard.
You want to see my Elon tattoo?
No, boy, I hope it's not in a very visible spot because
Forehead.
I was wondering why you were wearing
Let
that
me
hat.
pull my Kangol hat up just a little bit.
So I don't know if you heard this new Tesla supercharger news.
What's up?
Well, on April 30th, it was reported that Tesla was laying off the entire team responsible for building its electric vehicle charging stations. Approximately 500 employees who work in the supercharger group, in addition to their public policy team that worked with utility providers to carry out the EV infrastructure transition.
That sucks, Nicole.
Yes,
why?
But it's too soon to say exactly what the impact is going to be.
Okay.
Because there are some potential benefits. For example, he laid off their public policy team, which I just mentioned.
Awesome.
Huge
benefit.
But the thing is, those public policy people are really good at working with localities to get the chargers installed. Like, say what you like about EVs, but I haven't heard anybody complain like they put in this new Tesla station and it's so disruptive. You know, they haven't like, to the best of my knowledge, they haven't like incurred any blackouts or like damaged any power stations or like done anything that is really a problem. These public policy people are really good, and now they're available to other car companies and other energy companies to potentially grease the EV wheels.
Wow, that is a real grasp for an upside to this.
Well,
he fired all the people who were already doing that job, and maybe they could do the job again.
I mean, these people like are very good, and I think they could get picked up somewhere else. Elon has also said, I mean, I don't know, take him on his word, but he said that they're going to continue to build out the network just at a slower pace. And I personally don't want to go into too much detail on this because we're recording this like not long after the news dropped, and it's probably not great, but it's too soon to tell. And I'm also just not like an expert on EV charging infrastructure in a way that other people are. I will say I listened to two really good podcasts about it that I would direct people to. One is Ed Zitron's Better Offline podcast with Ed Niedermeyer, and they're talking, it's a little bit more about safety and the self-driving issues that Tesla is having. And then another really good one for this specific subject is Shift Key with Robinson Meyer and Jesse Jenkins. Their May 8th episode, Elon Musk is putting the EV transition in peril. So, I mean, based on their title, I have to think it's, not great. But they do talk about like kind of more of what it could mean in a pretty nuanced way. And one thing that I found interesting, again, I'm paraphrasing a podcast, so like listen to the actual podcast where they talk about it.
A podcast.
But part of this weirdly happened because there was federal money that Tesla got in exchange for being willing to open their charging network to any car, but that ultimately wasn't maybe a great business decision for Tesla, and they were so attracted by this big pot of money right now because the Tesla charging network was basically advantageous to them because it's the best charging network, and that's what gets people to buy Teslas, which is where they make way more money than they do on charging. And so now if you don't have to have a Tesla to use the charging network, then they lose those potential customers. That being said, even that is an oversimplification. So really go listen to the Shift Key episode if you want more detail about this specifically.
Stop listening to this podcast
Finish
and
this
listen
one.
to
Finish this one
okay.
first, and
Finish
make sure to like go to all of the ad links using our URLs, and then go listen to these other podcasts.
Okay, that's
we'll link them in the show notes
at the very bottom, though.
So I do think, despite all of these like issues and things that have popped up, and not getting a lot of EV chargers built yet, I do think that we're headed in the right direction, and there will be more EV chargers. I just don't know if it's going to happen fast or slow. But we will eventually get to the point where range anxiety doesn't need to be a huge issue, except for maybe people who live in the most rural areas.
Yeah, and this is like, isn't the whole point of the free market that like as these things get bought more and more, private companies start to put more charging ports in, like that feels like a pretty natural, like induced demand sort of situation.
Yeah. And again, smaller vehicle, smaller battery size, takes less
Smaller
time.
vehicle, so tiny, can't even get my foot in there. Tried to put my foot in, it went into my foot. I got a splinter. I tell them I got a splinter. Sorry.
Donald Trump, are you guesting on the podcast? That was so good.
Worst podcasts. This podcast was born with a very small brain. Hey there, a little inside baseball. We record this very podcast at the Climate Town office. And if you're not familiar with Climate Town, it's a YouTube series we make for as cheaply as possible. And that means schlepping our camera equipment all over New York City.
Yes, our backpacks are full, and the gear we reach for every time is peak design.
That voice you just heard is Ben Boult, the executive producer of this podcast and of Climate Town.
That's right, Rollie.
I mean, this is an ad, but we are genuinely loaded with peak design gear, from backpacks to sling bags to camera accessories. And by we, I usually just mean Ben. Ben literally has like 7 things from Peak Design on during any given shoot.
Yeah, Rollie, I mean, they make good stuff. My freaking phone case from Peak Design. My phone charger on my desk. That's Peak Design too. My out front bike mount that I can put my phone on. Guess what? Peak Design. You know that little tripod we use on Climate Town shoots?
The little travel tripod?
The little travel tripod. They got organizers. They got straps, clips, duffel bags, everyday bags.
And they're not fucking around. Peak Design gear is guaranteed for life, whether you buy it firsthand or 10th hand.
And they can make that kind of commitment and not go broke because they build stuff to last.
As my father would say, it's built like a brick shithouse. And now I'm hearing it out loud, that term is a little dated.
Peak Design is a certified fair trade B Corp that prides itself on recyclable materials, and it lobbies lawmakers in D.C. for environmental legislation. They're also the group who nominated Climate Town to be an environmental partner with 1% for the planet. So double thank you. And they also have been a podcast supporter of ours from day one. And also, they just make really good stuff.
So go to peakdesign.com/playbook. That's PEAK design.com/playbook for 20% off some of our favorite products and a picture of Ben on set dripping with Peak Design gear.
I'm literally going to try to put as many pieces of Peak Design gear as I possibly can into one picture.
I'm glad we just got health insurance because Ben's back is going to be demoed.
But not because the Peak Design stuff is heavy. The other shit that we put inside it.
In bulk, it's heavy.
If you
stack enough Peak Design stuff.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not saying it's heavy gear.
They got a sweet
good
shoulder
gear.
strap. It really takes the weight off your shoulder.
It's going to crush you to death.
If that's how I got to go, sayonara.
Another argument that I hear fairly frequently about charging is they're more expensive to recharge than just filling up your tank.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
It's really dumb. It's multiple studies have shown that actually greater EV adoption means electricity prices are neutral or even improved for some consumers. According to AC, which is the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. Quote, 3 recent studies find that the load growth caused by EV charging can actually reduce electricity prices because EV charging can spread fixed electricity system costs over a larger volume of sales, modestly reducing the per kilowatt hour rates.
That's very interesting. Also, like rooftop solar in California sometimes there's too much solar for the grid. You know, it can use up, just jam them in cars.
And this isn't a technology that's super widespread right now, but one argument for electric cars is they're a good way to balance those like periods of high supply because you could, you know, fill up the battery in your car during the day when it's sunny out and then plug your car in at home and then use some of the energy from your car to like power things in your home. That's
nice.
Not really a thing right now.
Well, the car is a power wall.
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
Yeah.
There are certain EVs that like part of their argument is like you can use it to like plug in your cooler or whatever, which you can also do in like gas cars. But
I don't think you can plug a cooler in anywhere. I think that's pretty cordless.
You know, one of those
refrigerator.
Well, we had a cooler growing up when we were on road trips that was like it was a little cooler, but you plugged it into the like lighter outlet in the car and it would just keep things cooler for longer.
Sounds like you got a refrigerator.
I mean, yeah, I guess if you want to split hairs, then fine.
If I want to say the definition of a thing.
And I think another interesting point is that this is another way to think of our cars as tools and of our EVs as tools, where it's maybe not perfectly slotted into the system that we have now for cars, but it can also do things that our cars that we have now can't do. So it's a way that we can rethink our energy grid and the way that we power all of our devices. And according to energy.gov, the U.S. household average of about 16 cents per kilowatt hour, charging an electric car at home would cost nearly $60 per month. This amount is most likely lower than what you pay each month to buy gasoline. So there's kind of no justification for saying that my energy prices are going to go up and they're expensive to charge, because that just isn't
Yeah, I mean,
true.
your electricity bill will go up, but your gas bill will go to zero,
Yeah.
and that will
help,
yeah,
I would say.
fully subsidize and then some. I mean, like,
Yeah.
literally, it is simply cheaper to charge a car with electricity than it is to fill it up with gasoline, right? Like, the per mile cost is now cheaper if you have an electric car.
Yeah, I think there is, again, some variation, because it's like if you're going from like a subcompact gas car to a big electric Rivian, it's like
What
hard
kind
to...
of asshole would do
I
that?
don't know, but it's hard to make a one-to-one comparison for all of the other reasons we've been saying it's hard to compare one-to-one gas and EVs. But according to the Washington Post, in 2023, the Washington Post asked researchers at the nonpartisan energy and climate firm Energy Innovation to find, quote, the true cost of refueling in all 50 states by drawing on data sets from federal agencies, AAA, and others. And it found that in all 50 states, it's cheaper for Americans to fill an EV than a gas-powered vehicle. Quote, an American driving the average 14,000 miles per year would see an annual savings of roughly $700 for an electric SUV or sedan, up to $1,000 for a pickup. That's according to Energy Innovation. And in 2018, the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute, which focused specifically on fuel cost, found that the average cost to fuel an electric car was $485 a year compared to $1,117 a year for a gas-powered vehicle.
Okay.
So by pretty much every measure, it is cheaper to refill your electric car with electrons than it is to fill your gas car with gas to drive the equivalent distance. But even if the electricity is cheaper, our dear friend Representative Pete Stauber wants to remind us that EVs are expensive. They're more expensive to buy than ICE cars.
My constituents would have to work a full year to pay for this unreliable car and would barely have enough left over to care for their family.
You have to use half of your family's household budget, and then you don't have any money to raise your family.
Do you know how much my neighbor Carol spends on Netflix?
This is true for new cars. According to CarEdge.com, as we begin 2024, the average price paid for a new EV is 17% higher than the overall new car market average. So on average, new EVs are more expensive to buy than new gas cars. There's a few reasons for that. A big one is basically that American car manufacturers make money on big luxury cars more so than like smaller, cheaper cars. And so they just don't really have the financial incentive to create the kind of car that would be more affordable because they don't actually make as much money off of those.
Right.
Another reason is that in America, we basically only make SUVs. Over 80% of all the new cars sold in America are SUVs and trucks.
Well, that's only the vast majority. Surely a couple of sedans slip in here and there.
Only by accident. And remember, big cars, particularly big electric cars, are going to be more expensive because the battery is far and away the most expensive component. So if we made a world where we incentivized smaller cars, it would be more affordable for the average person to be able to buy an electric car.
But how do we make car companies build smaller cars? I mean, obviously they're building cars that they think are going to sell and that are going to make them money. So how do we force them to do what we want them to do?
Well, it's not easy. A big one that we'd have to do is we'd have to close something called the light duty loophole, which is funny because it has the word duty in it.
I find it funny because it has the word loophole in it.
And basically, it's complicated. I helped Not Just Bikes write a whole episode about it. I think we talked about it a little bit in the season 1 episode, but it basically means that light duty trucks, which includes SUVs, are way more profitable for car companies to make. And that's like a huge reason that they're so aggressively pushing these big cars and why you see so many of them.
Why is it more profitable to make a SUV?
Because they don't have to compete with foreign automakers as much.
Oh.
It truly is too complicated for me to easily
Got it.
tell you about it. But basically, there's less competition. And now they've sort of induced their own demand for SUVs, because when everybody on the road has an SUV, everybody's like, well, I'm going to get demolished if I drive a subcompact.
It's an arms race, baby.
It is. So that's part of it. We could also do something that certain like European and I think Asian countries have done, which is make the registration and insurance fees much higher for larger cars. That is something that's been like widely resisted in the country.
Taking up more space, causing more damage to the road. It makes a lot of sense. Fuck you, European and Asian policy. In America, it doesn't matter how big or damaging our cars are. We all pay the same amount, just like a just like capitalism.
So those are like the first two things. I'm not going to say that it's easy. That will be very difficult to get people to agree to those policies, but those are two big ones that we could hit to start with. Worth pointing out is that the cost of ownership over time is likely to be less for EVs. I'm always a little bit wary about making this argument because it's like, okay, it'll save me money 20 years from now, but I have to buy a car tomorrow.
Yeah, just buy an apartment complex. And then rent it out.
Yeah. But that being said, over time, they are a little bit cheaper. According to Clean Technica, Kelley Blue Book recently crunched the numbers comparing a new Tesla Model 3 to an Audi TT, which is a similar model car. What the publication found was that the Model 3 averaged $39,000 to own after 5 years, while the Audi TT had a 5-year cost of about $63,000. Both figures were measured by accounting for the cost of gas or charging, as well as maintenance, repairs, auto insurance, depreciation, and other factors causing out-of-pocket expenses. So that's great news. If you have a little more money to spend up front, you might save a little more money in the long term. One interesting thing about EVs is how they're going to impact the used car market, which is how a lot of people afford cars in this country and why it is often cheaper to buy an ICE car. The used car market is changing in general. As many people learned during the pandemic, like the used car market exploded. I happened to buy my $7,000 car like right before the used car market went crazy. But now if you look for a similar model car, it's like 2 to 3 times more expensive than what I paid for it. Suckers. So used gas cars are becoming more expensive. And as we get more electric cars on the road, that's going to become dicier because you can buy a used gas car and repair it as needed. That's a little harder to do with an EV. And the reason is that batteries degrade over time. It's actually not as bad as we thought, but it's true that they do degrade. Replacing an EV battery is like a $10,000 to $20,000 lump sum up front. So if I buy a car and need to replace, one of my pistons within the first year of ownership, then I can replace that one part and it might suck, but it's not going to be a $20,000 upfront expense. I looked at getting the battery replaced in my Boult because it is starting to degrade. It's a 10-year-old car, and it would cost more than the car is worth. So now I'm just putting up with my 33-mile electric range. David Tracy, who also is a wonderful automotive writer and works for the Autopian, bought a used Nissan Leaf that has a range of about 25 miles, but he takes it on those 3-mile trips to the grocery store and stuff. The used market is going to be full of stuff like that Nissan Leaf with 25 miles. They're cars that are basically fine, but the battery is degraded to the point that people don't want it. Understandably, I think, particularly if you only have one car. So what that means is that the buffer of used cars to cover the market will no longer be the buffer that it once was. And that means that automakers might be incentivized to build cheaper, smaller electric cars because there will be more of a demand for new cars as opposed to used cars.
Gotcha.
But we don't know for sure because we're not there yet.
I mean, that's a legitimate problem that you can't really get an affordable electric vehicle at the moment because the new ones cost a lot and there isn't a big market for resale electric vehicles. Yeah,
I mean, there is, like, you can sell a used Tesla for a pretty decent amount of money. It's certainly more than a 25-mile range Nissan Leaf.
Right.
So it's not that it doesn't exist. It's just that it's really going to change the dynamic of the used car market in ways that we can't 100% predict right now. This is, again, a problem that would be ameliorated if we made, like, smaller vehicles. But right now they just don't make money on those, so they don't sell them.
Yeah, and, like, it'll also be ameliorated, great word.
Thank you so
by
much.
a larger supply of electric vehicles. Like,
yeah.
We've spent 100 years selling internal combustion engine cars, and so there's, like, a fucking ton of them on the road. As we sell more EVs, there will be more used EVs on the road.
Yeah.
Surely.
Yeah. And speaking of the problems of replacing parts in a used car, which is most often the battery, another criticism that you hear sometimes is that you can't do your own maintenance on these cars. This is somewhat true. I don't think it's like a particularly legitimate criticism because modern gasoline cars are not super friendly to work on either. It's not kind of the home mechanic era anymore. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that ICE cars are becoming increasingly computerized. So more of the car is just controlled by a computer, which you can work on, but I wouldn't. When I had my backup cam installed in my car, I had it done at Car Toys because if you do it wrong, it'll brick my car.
Really?
Yeah.
It'll just stop your car from working?
Yeah, ever again.
Holy shit.
Yeah, like I can't replace my infotainment system because it's like integral to the car turning on and stuff.
Nicole, capitalism works, okay? I don't care about your criticisms about the free market. It works, okay?
And I want to be clear. My car is an internal combustion engine car, and it's like it was like the beta model of like this particular plug-in electric. I think this is less true of like more modern cars that have better computer technology. So don't let that scare you off from buying like a plug-in electric. Like it's not true of all plug-in electric. It was just my
a plug-in
bad one.
electric brick.
That being said, one big point that Jason made is like gearheads are going to find a way. So like with increasing computerization, you can still do it. Some people do like swap out the chips, et cetera, to give it more tuning. However, the reason that cars are harder to work on now is just that they're designed in a way that's more modular, which means that when you're like getting a car repair done now, it's more likely that they'll just take out a chunk of your car and replace it as opposed to fixing it. And that's just not really something you can do at home unless you have like a crazy parts supplier. Cars in general haven't been very friendly for the backyard mechanic for a while, and EVs are somewhat worse, but not vastly worse. And there's still some things that you can do at home. Suspension parts are largely suspension parts no matter the drivetrain. So if you want to fix your car suspension, that kind of stuff you can do at home.
Mirrors, you can adjust your mirrors.
You can adjust your mirrors all you want. EVs do have one disadvantage, which is there are high voltage lines that can kill you. So you want to watch out for those. But generally they're constructed in a way that you'd have to like really be trying to go into the battery.
Oh, I'll find a way. I'll get in there. Where does it keep all of its electric?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not exactly a good selling point that, like, you can work on your internal combustion engine car at home, because that's kind of saying more shit will break. You like fixing cars? You'll love fixing a car that breaks all the time.
Yes, exactly. And I was just about to make the point. Great timed joke, Rollie. Because a study from Atlas Public Policy called Comparing the Cost of Owning the Most Popular Vehicles in the United States shows that, it's these dark blue bars here, you can see that across every class of vehicle, it is cheaper to maintain an EV than it is a comparably sized gas-powered car.
Oh, okay.
And again, a big reason for that is just that there's fewer moving parts in an electric vehicle, so there's just less stuff to break. There are less moving things that can clang into each other and break.
If we can break it, we'll break it.
Yeah.
But I guess it makes sense that an EV breaks less. You're exploding fewer things in the car
in
a little
spaces?
metal tank.
Yeah, so like Jason said, gearheads will find a way. And what's interesting is there's actually an emerging group of people, real car guys, who turn classic internal combustion engine cars into EVs. And I'll put a cool link to one of those in the show notes, by which I mean our producer Ben will put it in the show notes after I send it to him.
And there's a really awesome video of an electric car doing a donut. I assume Ben will put that in the show notes also.
Let's also talk for just a quick second about Pete Stauber's point that Minnesota's just too cold to have electric cars. There's a study from Recurrent about EV travel that found that the reduced range from cold is about 29%, and that since median travel is under 50 miles a day, almost nobody is going to have a hard time making those trips, assuming that they're able to charge their car at home, even with the degradation. I don't want to say degradation because it's not like, it's just cold. It just doesn't charge as much. It doesn't mean your battery's permanently degraded. Again, only about 2% of all of the trips that we make are over 50 miles. And basically every new electric vehicle on the market has a battery that far exceeds that. So even if there is some diminishment in charging capacity, they're going to be able to get you over 50 miles.
Nicole, I have range anxiety, and I'm going to buy the shittiest electric vehicle I can find.
There's also ways that you can minimize that. You can do something called preconditioning your battery. The reason that your range decreases when it's cold weather is that some of the energy from the battery is used to heat the battery itself. So if you're in your garage at home and you precondition the battery, you're heating that at home, so you're using less of your overall energy to heat the battery. You can also rely on things like seat heaters or steering wheel heaters as opposed to just using the AC system in your car to heat the car, because that's like a little bit more energy efficient. So there's ways to mitigate it. To give Pete Stauber credit, yes, there is a little bit smaller range. According to the International Council on Clean Transportation, in an article called 5 Things You Know About Electric Vehicles That Aren't Exactly
The
True.
BuzzFeedification of all of our news is staggering.
It says that data shows that even a battery electric vehicle with relatively low range of 200 kilometers will go farther on a single charge than 96% of American and German drivers actually drive on an average day. So
That's a funny group of drivers.
sure, well,
American
we're best
and
friends.
German, yeah. American, German, and Tuvalu drivers.
Yeah. So again, if you're getting the used Nissan Leaf with 25 miles of range, that's probably an issue, but there's a lot of solutions for people who live in Minnesota. You know, I don't think it's a reason to completely write off EVs across the country.
Yeah, and I think to the earlier point, like, they're a tool. You know,
Yeah.
like, a lot of people in Florida don't need snow shovels because that's just not a tool that people in Florida need. If we're talking about adoption of electric vehicles and we're at like, hey, we want to be to 60%, probably that number is going to be lower in some states and higher in other states, and it might be lower in Minnesota, and that's just how statistics are going to work.
Yeah. And with all this climate change that's going around, we're not going to have snow soon anyways.
Alleged climate change, Nicole.
So I want to wrap this up by talking about this big idea of cars as tools, and how if we start thinking of them as tools and like what kind of tools do we need to do the job that we want to do, we can kind of reimagine the way that we get around places. And I want to talk a lot about small electric vehicles, because a lot of the problems that we've talked about today, as I've said over and over again, can be largely mitigated by not driving Hummer EVs around. And to illustrate that point, I want to show you a clip of many mentioned guest star of this podcast, Jason Torchinsky. He bought this car called the Changli, which is like the cheapest electric car you can buy. It was $933 on Alibaba. When he got it shipped here, that boosted the total up to like $3,000. And
Doesn't it suck when shipping triples the cost? I bought this fucking pool table for $500, and then it was $1,000 to move it.
Well, see, transport costs very high.
Transport.
That's why part of why batteries are so expensive.
Hell yeah.
And this is a clip of him using it, and we'll play it. But Rollie, I would also love for you to like describe what's happening.
Sure. Nicole has pulled out her laptop. Her fingers hovering over the play button.
Here we go.
She's clicking the play button.
Hey everybody, guess
Jason
what?
Torchinsky is standing in front of what looks like a gondola car, but it is in fact an electric vehicle.
And go over how the 1 year of Changli ownership has been and tell you all about it, everything you want to know.
Not only are they standing in front of an electric vehicle that looks kind of like a massive baby shoe, it looks like a very technologically advanced baby shoe. It's got like mirrors and windows and wheels, and like it looks pretty decent. I'm shocked that you could buy this for $900.
I wanted to show you the video where Jason unboxes it, because that's really cool, and he goes through all the things he's surprised that it has, but the audio quality wasn't very good. But I'll have I almost called him Professor Ben. I'll have Professor Producer Ben put that in the show notes, because I do think it's really worth watching.
I mean, you should unbox a car by getting in the car and then driving it out of the box. That's how you should always unbox a car.
The box was a little janky.
Faster. I had this on a track.
So they're cruising. Oh, they're flipping. They're drifting. They just drifted in the car. Holy
Yeah.
shit.
If you want to see some good drifting and shit that you shouldn't drift, please follow Jason Torchinsky and David Tracy on all forms of social media. That's their whole deal.
Do you remember Will It Blend?
No.
Will It Blend? Whatever. Do you know like the hydraulic press channel? Whatever. You're not online enough.
Yeah. I'm not online enough?
Stop shouting at me.
Sorry. One thing that I want to point out, this is in the video where he unboxes it. It is like a Chinese company, and it's a little janky, but they put decals on it to make it look cool, and this one just says fashion.
I had a stationary bike that I think similarly was from China, and it just said youthful. So I get it.
So Jason uses the Changli as like his daily driver to run errands and stuff. It has 1.1 horsepower. It goes top speed of about 25 miles per hour. Jason lives in an environment where you're particularly able to do stuff like this. He lives in a small college town, and there are low-speed vehicle lanes on the roads. When we think about incorporating these smaller electric vehicles, we also need to think about those kind of infrastructure changes. I'm reading this book right now called Near to Far, which I can't recommend it because
Enough.
I don't want to insult this guy. He seems like a totally nice guy. He's a car designer who specializes in designing really small electric cars, what are called neighborhood electric vehicles. And I do think they are absolutely what we need more of in America. The book itself is clearly written by an engineer, and the writing's not very good. And like a third of the book is about like this guy's career trajectory. But where I think it's valuable is he does have a lot of renderings of what like different kinds of neighborhood electric vehicles can look like. So
these are great.
Yeah, there's many options. And I think the more that we can make our streets amenable to these smaller electric vehicles, I think a golf cart is a pretty good frame of reference for the kinds of vehicles that we're talking about, but you can design them in a lot of different ways. The better we're going to be able to accommodate all of the needs of people who need to get around. Places like Celebration, Florida, which is a planned community. I know it sounds fake, but it's a planned community that's like associated with Disney resorts. I was going to write a screenplay called Murder and Celebration at one point, and then I was like, Nicole, you have to stop thinking a project just because you like the names. Focus on what you're working on.
That's some Romeo and Juliet shit right there. You can't back your way into a plot.
That's how I've written everything that I've ever done. So my parents bought the house that they're going to retire into, and it's in like a golf community, and it came with a golf cart, which is very cool. And there's no universe in which my mom doesn't drive places. Like she comes to New York to visit me and only takes taxis everywhere, even though it takes longer. And
she drives.
Yeah, she
move over.
She carjacks the taxis. But when she's in this house that they're going to retire to, she takes the golf cart everywhere. She prefers it over her normal car. So I think that these kind of neighborhood electric vehicles are like a great way to get people who are just never going to be convinced by like walking or cycling into something that is a little bit more environmentally friendly. These cars, you do have to charge more frequently because they have, you know, smaller batteries, but you also get much more range out of an equivalent mass of minerals. So that helps resolve some of those issues. They're fun to drive. They're way safer. I think a problem with convincing people like in the general world to get a smaller car is like, well, I'm facing down a Hummer EV that weighs literally like 7,000 pounds.
Right.
And I don't want my tiny little golf cart to get smashed into, which is why we need separate infrastructure for them. But the other thing to remember is that a lot of these cars, the top speed is like under 40 miles per hour, under 30 miles per hour. And at those speeds, collisions are just safer. This is from my conversation with Jason where we were talking about getting people into smaller cars on the roads and safety concerns. And he said there's always going to be the physics issue of if you get in a wreck with a GMC Yukon, you're going to be pretty fucked. But most of the contexts that you use these cars in are city low-speed driving, like 25 to 30 miles per hour in traffic. So you're probably going to be fine. But getting people to accept you'll probably be fine as an assurance is kind of a tall order. And so I think the more that we can incorporate small vehicle lanes, areas like Celebration, Florida, where vehicle access is restricted to the outskirts and you have to drive these smaller vehicles inside the city. I think all of that stuff is like a good way to think about how to use electric cars.
I mean, also, this is an opportunity to let old people drive safely.
Yes.
Like,
100%.
I don't want people who are 85 driving fucking tanks.
I think you're being half ironic about this.
No, I'm not.
Yeah. I think it's good. Like, we all get to a point where we're going to have to start thinking about taking our parents' car keys away. But what if we could replace them with a smaller vehicle that we didn't have to worry about as much? They would still have a lot more freedom, but you know, you don't have to worry about them plowing into an elementary school.
Or if they do, the kids inside won't even notice.
Yes, exactly. So there's a lot of arguments for that. Now, like I mentioned before, in America, we just don't make a lot of cars like this. There's no real financial incentive for the car companies to do it. China is like really surpassing us both in terms of like number of EVs sold and just different varieties of EVs you can buy. The Changli is marketed in China as like, grandpa's car for running errands. And we don't have a car in America that is like a specific purpose for that. And so I was really curious about why that is. And so I asked Jason about it, and he said China has a market that is much broader and more accepting of a wide variety of cars, and they're more willing to take more risks in some ways than we are. Chinese car makers will spawn new brands incredibly rapidly because they don't necessarily have the same like legacy brands that we've had in America. He wrote a big piece in The Atlantic on this. I will also send it to producer Ben to put in the show notes. The market in China is so huge that they can just try things and have buyers buy things and still make money. Also, their used car market isn't as strong as ours because China is relatively new to at least good cars. Our used car market, you can get pretty good cars from the early 2000s, certainly not as nice as like a new car, but I still see like 2002 Subaru Outbacks in Colorado everywhere. That's not true in China. There's just a lot of garbage there. They don't have a huge inventory of good used cars, which is why they're more willing to like take a chance on different kinds of EVs. So again, that's a reason that I think like as the American used car market changes, we might see some changes in the kinds of cars that American manufacturers release. There's also like some different conditions in China. Like they're more accepting of cars that you don't own the batteries in, where you drive the car to a depot and rather than recharge your battery, you take out the battery and replace it with a new one, which makes things a little bit easier. They also have a much more urban population of people who are driving cars. So people are less afraid of like, I can't wake up at 2 a.m. and immediately drive 500 miles. And I think the way that we transition to some of these smaller cars is to start in places like Jason lives, like small college towns, because they're already close together. A lot of it is designed for travel on foot anyway. College kids are just more accepting of like, oh yeah, look at that weird fucking thing. If you take it to a very like dispersed city full of giant trucks and a lot of stroads, you're probably just going to get people mad at you that you're only going 25 miles per hour on a 45 mile per hour road. So we do need different infrastructure, but I think the way to start, just in the same way that I'm always talking about how like we're not going to go from sprawled suburbs to downtown Manhattan. I'm not saying that we need to immediately go to like every road should only be golf carts all the time. But I think in places where it makes sense, like retirement communities, like I think places around Belmar would be a great place to have like neighborhood electric vehicles just to get like across Wadsworth and
at least
stuff.
Start the process in places where it makes sense and let's see.
Exactly. And I think we also need incentives kind of in the same way that the regulations in the Inflation Reduction Act sort of serve to disincentivize or sourced from questionable places. I think we need more regulations that will discourage use of big automobiles and encourage use of these small neighborhood electric vehicles. Stuff like being able to access closer parking to stores, stuff like lower registration and insurance fees, because it does just cost the public less. There are fewer externalities associated with these smaller cars, so people who have them should have to pay less. And I think these are all ways that we can, like within a system that looks very much like the one we have now, start to make changes for the better that get us not only out of ICE cars, but also away from the most damaging impacts of electric cars.
That sounds very reasonable, Nicole.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, I will not be investing in your little electric car scheme.
Well, then I guess enjoy your Ford F650.
Beep, beep.
That's the
I
horn
did have
on
a
it?
little horn put
Maybe.
in. Yeah. I call it the Roadrunner horn. All right, Nicole, I just checked my bank account and it's $7,000 short because of all the improv classes I took. To which I said, awesome, worth it. Let's get our money's worth out of it. Let's rip an improv scene here.
Okay.
And let's call it I'll play my dad.
Okay.
But I'll call him Rick Williams. His real name is Dick Williams. I'll call him Rick Williams.
Okay.
Just so he doesn't sue me.
Okay.
He's very litigious.
I know that about him.
And then you be
I'll be
me.
you.
Yeah.
I'll be you.
Call me.
My mustache smells like soup.
That's what you think I think?
I think so. I think you're walking around all day going, when did I eat soup?
I haven't had soup in months.
Well, you got to clean that mustache. I don't know what to tell you.
Is this what everyone thinks of me? All right. You're Rollie. Try to pitch your dad an EV, and we'll see if I bite.
Okay. Hey.
Oh, jeez.
Sorry. I shouldn't have snuck up on you like
Put
that.
my hearing aids in. Hang on.
Okay.
Hey, I'm reading in the Denver Post this morning about Nikola Jokic, and God, that guy can play some basketball, huh?
Yeah, he sure can. That's not how you pronounce his name, but we'll work on that another time.
Okay.
Hey.
MVP.
MVP.
I'm just saying. I don't follow basketball. I know you like this guy, so I'm reading all the articles about
Everybody
him
likes him.
in the Denver Post.
Thank you for supporting physical media, by the way.
Do you support physical media?
No, I read everything online.
Well, yeah. So thank you for ruining physical media.
Okay, well, I feel like this is taking a turn against me. Hey,
Well,
Dad.
I'm going to drink some Lapsang Souchong tea here. Hang
You
on.
love your Lapsang Souchong tea. Okay, while you're taking a big sip of that tea, I was talking to Mom, and she said that you guys were thinking about getting a new car.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I'm gonna
I want a green one.
a green one.
Yeah.
Now, I hope you mean green as in eco-friendly.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Forest green.
We could probably
Doesn't
make that
show
happen.
dirt.
Does it not?
I don't know.
I believe that. Anyway, I was thinking maybe you and Mom could get an electric car.
Oh, I'm just worried about range anxiety. I don't want to break down in the middle of the highway just because my car ran out of electric.
Yeah, totally. So how often are you driving long distance? What do you think is like the average distance that you drive?
Probably 2-3 miles.
Okay.
Pretty average.
Okay, so most EVs, I would venture to say all EVs can make it let's be generous and say 6-mile round trip.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's good. What if I have to drive all the way down to the scout shop? That's 3 miles away. That's a 6-mile round trip. I might run out of electric.
Okay, are you going to do that trip more than 30 times in a row?
I might need to go to the scout shop a couple of times in the day in case they get a new shipment of the plastic backing for the amount of years you've been in scouting pins.
Look, Dad, when we get together and we both put on our Eagle Scout uniforms.
As you know, I was never an Eagle Scout, son. I made it to Life Scout, and I couldn't do the running requirement.
And I take every opportunity I can to rub your face in it. Regardless, neither one of us needs that amount of backing for pins for how long we've been in the Boy Scouts. And even if we did, an electric vehicle has more than enough charge to go back and forth to the scout shop as much as we need.
Let me paint you a picture, son. I'm out there on I-25.
Okay.
And it starts snowing. The moment one of those snowflakes hits the car, immediately shuts off because EVs don't work in the cold. That's the problem.
Okay, that doesn't happen.
Are you sure?
I'm positive that doesn't
Okay.
happen. What you're probably thinking of is when it gets cold, the range of the battery can decrease somewhat.
Oh, that is it. That's right. That's what I was
Yes, which
thinking of.
I understand why you'd be concerned. You live in Colorado. It snows there a lot. But here's the thing. EVs are kind of just a different technology than a gas-powered car. And there's things that you can do in the EV to minimize that loss of range. So you can pre-treat the battery. You can heat yourself with seat warmers more than the AC system in the car. But also, even if, and I know you're a big fan of Representative Pete Stober, and we watched that Mayor Pete interview together.
I like him, but not for the reason you'd think.
Yeah.
I like
You
him.
like
I
him
like
because of his hockey
passion.
career.
Yeah, no, his hockey career. That's
Yeah. Even if his figure of over 50% range loss is true, which it's not, you could still go back and forth to the tackle shop, the Boy
Tackle
Scout
shop.
shop all day. I don't know. Maybe you're into fishing in your old age. We don't
I'm
talk
not.
like we used to, Dad. I don't know what you're doing these days.
It's not fishing.
Well, now I know that.
Okay.
And I'm going to have to buy you a new birthday gift.
Well, can I interest you in some tea?
No, thank you.
Are you sure you don't want any of this Lapsang Souchong tea? I made extra.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm all jacked up from all the coffee I drank at Bean Foster's earlier today.
Wow, you love that coffee shop.
I love Bean Foster's.
You and your friend Nicole sometimes
We go there all the time.
To write.
Uh-huh.
That's fun for you guys.
Yeah. Anyway, what were we talking about?
I want to go on a long road trip. I don't know when or where or if I'll actually do it, but I can't get an EV because on the off chance that I'll actually go on that road trip.
Okay, well, let's say that you want to drive to where I believe you're originally from in Olathe, Kansas?
Nope.
Don't you-
Iowa.
Iowa. Well, let's say you want to go to Iowa.
Okay.
I think an EV would probably be up to the job, but if you really don't feel like that's the case, I'm going to pitch you this. What if you keep our old Subaru?
Okay.
And then for your daily trips, which are much shorter, you get something called a neighborhood electric vehicle.
I'm listening.
A neighborhood electric vehicle is much smaller. It would take less energy to charge. It would take up less space in the garage.
Oh, I do have a very difficult time getting around your mom's car to get to the photo albums on the wall.
Yeah. Okay. Well, regardless, a neighborhood electric vehicle is small, it's easy to charge, and it would get you to the close places to where you live. You and Mom just moved into this lovely independent living campus.
Yeah.
Anyway, you moved into this place where there's like a lot of things that are close to you and Mom, which is great. And a neighborhood electric vehicle could get you to all those places, be much cheaper than buying a full-size electric vehicle. And for the road trip that maybe you'll take someday, you could use a gas car for that.
That's a great idea, son. Hey, I don't care what anybody says about you. You're a smart kid.
Wait a second. Is that what Mom has been saying about me?
A lot of people have some pretty terse words about you.
Oh, geez.
And I tell them, yeah, but he's a pretty smart kid.
Well, thank you for standing up for me, Dad.
No problem.
All right. Why don't we put on a Nuggets game and watch Nikola Jokic waddle up the court?
Are you sure I can't interest you in a lukewarm cup of Lapsang Souchong tea?
You know what? I will have some Lapsang Chulong tea.
Wow, that's offensive.
What?
Lapsang Souchong.
Souchong. Boy, that is offensive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lapsang Souchong
That's
tea?
right. That's the name of the tea. It's just the name of the tea. The Climate Deniers Playbook was created by Rollie Williams, that's me, Nicole Conlan, and Ben Boult.
Our hosts are Rollie Williams and Nicole Conlan, who is me, and our executive producer is Ben Boult.
The show is produced by Gregory Haddock and edited by Brittany Terrell.
Our researchers are Carly Rizzuto, Canute Haroldson, and James Crugnale.
Theme music from the smooth, sultry mind of Tony Dominic.
And artwork by Jordan Dahl, who, yes, is technically my boyfriend, but that's not why we hired him. He's actually just really good at art.
Special thanks to the Civil Liberties Defense Center.
And to all of you who actually listen to the show.
And apparently even the credits.
Now that's dedication. My mustache smells like soup.